Thank you all for being here. It's really wonderful to see faces and squares, to be able to share and listening and seeing each other. Our readers tonight are Bev Dahlen, but not here, perhaps virtually through the reading of her materials. Our other readers who are here are Cynthia Hogue and Cole Swensen. Again, it's so wonderful to see everyone's faces. Before we begin, I just would like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we call home. Tucson, where POG is based, is the ancestral home of the Tohono O'odham and the Pasquayaqui nations. So I'd like us all to please take a moment at this time to think about how we can move forward in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration after a history and in the midst of a history of violence and dispossession. So thank you all again. This reading and all the events our poetry organizing group organizes are made possible by the support of many benefactors, and I'd like to acknowledge them now. Thank you again to all of these benefactors. So institutional support comes from AZ Cares, Arizona Cares, from poets and writers, from Chax Press, from the Warehouse Arts Management Organization, from the University of Arizona Poetry Center, as well as the University of Arizona English Department and Arizona Quarterly. We'd also like to thank our many individual donors. So our patrons include Charles Alexander, Mary Ellen Bartholomew, Charles Bernstein, Cynthia Hogue, Jason Lagapa, Joan Larkin, Judith Lefebvre, Cameron Louie, Lisa Martin, Eric Matchett, John Malillo, Cynthia Miller, Tenney Nathanson, Nancy Quigg, Stephen Romaniello, Stephen Salmoni, Will Stanier, Richard Tavener, and David Weiss. And our sponsors include Karen Brennan, Cutthroat, a Journal of the Arts, Reed Dixon, Lynn Finger, Maggie Golston, Barbara Henning, Jean Hoiving, Anna Lambert, Little Red Leaves, Heidi McDonald, Barbara Miller, Laura Mullen, Jameson Nunix, Oracle Retreat for Writers, Jenna Osman, Propolis Press, Anthony Sovak, Mariah Starr, Cole Swensen, Susan Thackeray, and Michelle Worthington. Thank you all for your kind support. And this is also a reminder that you, our viewers and listeners, help make this work possible. So if you haven't already, I hope you can please donate to tonight's event. And please consider becoming a patron of POG and pledging another amount to the work that we all do and bring together here. So I'm really excited again about our reading and our event tonight. Tonight's first reader, Cynthia Hogue, will be introduced by our own Cynthia Miller. Thank you, Cynthia.
Hi, thank you so much for coming, and we're going to do our best here. It's a very exciting evening to put these through Wonder Women together with just such a everyone wanted to do it. It was so exciting, and that we have the bulk of the ship here is just great. And we will all be sending cards and notes and love to Bev in her speechless way right now. All right. Cynthia Hogue is a Virgo poet, translator, editor, and interviewer. She was born in the Midwest and raised in the Adirondacks, and earned a BA studying comparative literature at Oberlin College, an MAH at SUNY Buffalo, and a PhD at the University of Arizona. In her poems, Cynthia is often concerned with the transformative power of myth. Eco-poetics, feminist issues all play a part in her most recent works. Describing herself as intuitive and exploratory, she talks about her book Incognito Body, published in 2006. I'm interested in social economic power, how it is used, whether it is shared. what happens when one shifts the dynamic to power sharing, for example, which listening on a very deep level can begin to do. And we all know that listening is love. Okay, poets know that best. Power sharing with her readers, her numerous collections of poetry include Revenants from 2014, or Consequences, Flux, Touchwood, In June, The Labyrinth, The Incognito Body, The Never Wife, The Woman in Red. Other things that she's been working on, critical volume, Scheming Women, Poetry, Privilege, and the Politics of Subjectivity from 1995. She edited The Sword Went Out to Sea, Synthesis of a Dream, by Delia Alton, by HD. And the first edition was co-edited with Julie Vandeveer. Okay. Innovative Women Poets, an anthology of contemporary poetry and interviews, co-edited with Elizabeth Frost. And what a great idea that was, to not only have like the poet's statement, but to have them sit down with another poet and discuss their work. There's nothing better, more insightful. Also, let's see, We Who Love to Be Astonished, co-edited with Laura Hinton. Okay, let's see. She collaborated on another interview-based volume of poetry with photographer Rebecca Ross, When the Water Came, The Evacuees of Hurricane Katrina in 2010, creating poems in dialogue with the images. All right, where do I want to go? Let's see. She also received, along with her co-translator, Sylvain Gallet, from the Academy of American Poets, the Harold Morton Lambden Translation Award for the wonderful Virginie Laluc, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and Jean-Luc Nancy's Fortino Samano, or The Overflowing of the Poem. And if you have not read that text, you need to. It's many texts. It's a multi-layered text based on a photograph of a Zapatista revolutionary right before his execution, and what that might mean. Anyway, right now their latest collaboration is a book of poetry from Omnidon Publishing by Nicole Brassard that's coming out soon. In her quest for comparative literature and mythology, Hogue has lived and taught in Iceland, Denmark, New Orleans, New York, and Pennsylvania, where she directed the Statler Center for Poetry at Bucknell University for 8 years. In 2003, I believe, she began to hold the Maxine and Jonathan Marshall Chair in Contemporary Poetry in the English Department at the dreaded Arizona State University. Okay. She's now living with Sylvain here in Tucson. Here tonight, she is to answer the age-old questions. When is French not like English? When is a mule not a mule? And what comes first, the music or the words? Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Cynthia. My goodness. It's all my life going past. I appreciate that. And I'm so glad to be here. And it's an honor to read here. Thank you to POG. And it's an honor to read with Cole. And to hear Bev Dahlen will be lovely. I thought I would open with a few poems from Nicole Brossard's Swensen, which we're calling Distantly. A bit as hats off to Cole Swensen, because she's helped us so much. She's been such a support to Sylvain and me in our translation efforts, but also Cynthia Miller's, a painting by Cynthia Miller will be the cover. So I'm very excited about that, coming out next spring. And Swensen Distantly is a linked series of very elliptical, gorgeously lyrical poems about cities, but really it's so close to Kristeva's Women's Time, the hopes, observations, emotions, perceptions, and dreams of female speaking subjects, but very postmodern. in the hard world of beauty and violence in the cities. So I'll read a couple of those to begin with, just to give you a flavor. Cities with their name. In the distance, Prague, the bridge, the castle, the time on the clock tower in history, the Jewish cemetery at the corner, Skopje, Istanbul, other alphabets, commerce of hours and spices like a river, red saffron pulsing with time. Cities with their fools for God. This time I count the hands, the feet, the tongues, the tunics, the pebbles, the heads, the beards, the skull caps, the veils, the scarves. I do not count the vertigos, the ablutions, the miracles, the whiplashes and the loudspeakers, the dozens of spat out words, such a big fire that water must be splashed on brow, on feet. I count the eyes, the fingers. I count until dust. I count until childhood. Cities without names. Cities when someone shoves you, says sorry, sorrow, because of the din and the rain, wraps arms around a melody to lift up the present, the strong perfume of change which fascinates you every morning. Anyway, you love humanity with helpless arms, without oxygen in the middle of its gleaming debris. Cities where my face returns. Cities with hope in the crosshairs of sobs. Do we think that dawn is a word, or have we said by accident tengo sueño, this very morning in a city in America? To smile, sap beyond all schedules. I breathe slowly, a life of frescoed words, women wrapped in the joy of wandering and infinity. And then I'll read a selection of poems from my forthcoming chapbook entitled Contain. These were written in response to the artist Morgan O'Hara's sequence of visual forms, very much like donuts, actually, varying colors, but meant to be a focus for meditation in the first couple of months of the pandemic. And I had a very visceral response to receiving this series as a PDF. And I sat down and wrote my own series in response to hers. Each poem is either 12 lines or 8 lines. The 12 lines are phrastic. They're meditating on her meditations. And the 8 lines are really documentary. Her process was to read the New York Times International. She was actually stuck in Germany she had been a visiting artist, but she couldn't get back. So each morning she would read the New York Times International and meditate. And I would trace her process and then create an octet, a documentary octet. So the poems alternate between phrastic and documentary, and they mix a bit. Mostly, I'm just going to read. There might be one that I contextualize. If the titles vary from the X form of containment, they're usually drawn from the newspaper. The first form of containment. A sphere floats in the frame, off center, earth off kilter, colors in darker hues than wailing sirens, the hot zones viral red edging into magenta, filling the circle majestic, forming the body celestial, feelings of healers encircled in care for human bodies, ailing, oh, lamentable, oh, able to care and to hopefully heal. Thus hearken the myriad of echoing voices. The third form of containment. Our multitudes still as nature gets to work, clearing detritus, composting waste, covering debris in green and gold, though skirmish and terror continue until the virus reach fighters and civilians alike. When darkness contains the tendrils and rustles that connect us. The global burgeon of lives together enclosed on earth, animal, plant, mineral, interrupted and changed. What the pandemic means for climate change. Something strange is sweeping the planet, clearing its waters and air, offering a glimpse of Earth's power to repair as a human nightmare unspools the gut-wrenching reality hitting the most vulnerable, the hardest. A best case outcome includes rethinking the social contract. At a time when leaders go all Darwin on us, we need to ask, what does a government owe its people? And we need to hear it answer. The fourth form of containment, a circumference in the pink, and outside that's a circle, an enclosing wall inside of which are strokes of red, streaks of stun that mark the act, the necessary choice between the act of carelessness and caring for, a shift in thought to care about each other, the we of us. What creatures are we when alone? The whole of us in the surround, the circle wherein we live. The sixth form of containment, a gash of black as from a scythe or scalpel sharpened by fate, razor cut through the wires of connection, seep of community spread coming to a minute satellite head inhaling the messy lines of communication, erasing the ancient roots of commerce and exchange. This global operation of containment isolates you from me, I from thou, world being slashed to bits, earth swaths in this catastrophe, catastrophic dissection of sorts, patient bleeding out. This next one, I'll give just a short context to. I was writing in very much in line with the meditation that O'Hara had conducted, but it's on Thoreau. There was a long article on Thoreau in the Sunday New York Times Magazine that it collages a bit of. But I was writing at a time of several high-profile police killings of African Americans. So this is dedicated to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Rayshard Brooks. Lessons in Constructive Solitude from Thoreau, and the epigraph is from Thoreau's comments on Walden Pond. Perhaps it seemed to me that I had several more lives to live and could not spare more time for that one. At rare intervals, a yogi, antennas raised to the communicating consciousness of nature, to seasons and all creatures four-legged, winged, scaled. A crank, no simple pacifist, this support of abolitionist John Brown's armed raid, still hot to the touch, himself in word and deed unviolenced. Thoreau resisted the warmongering, slave-supporting government, argued that purposeful solitude, codependent with principled communities, were the source of the country's long-term social health. As now civilly, the justice-minded march to avail justice for the dead who were not spared their lives to live. The ninth form of containment. You arrive, beloved, and my arms circle wide in spatial form, a body memory of holding you long and cupping your head in my hand. But for now, green hills rise in my embrace, gold-struck, bloom-filled, the warm burgeon of June on a breeze that strokes the neural roots of my blue-houred concentration, beyond which gray isolation, encircling me day and night, holds at bay the vision of violating social distance. For instance, to take a stand or speak a truth, which can be imaginatively proximate. My mind touching yours, threading the space with love. Take steps to counter the loneliness of social distancing. If you do nothing else, pick up the old-fashioned phone. Something you'll hear in the person's voice is critical in maintaining soul-restoring human connections. People worship false gods, wealth, reputation, power. Henry Adams described power as a sort of tumor that ends by killing the victim's sympathies. No room for selfishness in a pandemic. Put human connections on hold, and there's a price to pay. Crisis turns experts into stars. Be as water, you said earlier today, light as a pebble over which the quiet trickle, the cobalt calm. I wondered, as if to ask a star why it's not a moth, how it knows so much. Star, we plunder your light to constellate in dreams because we're flummoxed by facts. As water runs, blood flows. It's staining us all now, the innocent and the guilty alike, but we are not alike. The 12th form of containment. Brushstrokes radiate from a circle of light-flecked or mottled earthen shadows, not the brook, but the concentric rings a stone makes when cast into the brook. Waves form around where the stone sank, moving outward in circles meeting the rivulets of the running brook. Is the virus the stone or the wave patterns the stone creates with the weight of its sinking? A metaphor or the thing in itself, unchanging as the blue core, which is the midnight blue of truth. Virus as conceit. In the medicalized politics of the pandemic, it is tempting to claim the virus is like a foreign invasion, an alien attack, a more fanciful cause than rats or bats, unless Dracula himself, a traveling dead thing, has spread the infection. But Sontag, ill with cancer, was more succinct. Illness is not a metaphor. The most serious coronavirus exposures. In the totality of human experience, being alive is a dangerous exposure. In the totality of human emotions, love is a dangerous exposure. Hate often adopts social distancing. In the totality of human imagination, the mind opening to others' suffering is dangerous. Open minds can't be closed. The 16th form of containment. We've entered a zone where the claim to plenties in abundantly empty words. Here on the ground, everything's burned, barren, where the angels buzz over our heads like copters, hovering, as if God manifest. Monsieur Demone in his White House, having barricaded himself in. What's safe for him isn't for us. Grace, a fickle dispensation, and never a given, like the air we breathe, something which can be taken away. A silent spring is saying something. The planet was quiet, so I could hear it whirling around the sun, feel its smallness, how fleeting being is. Spring was fearful and something shifted. Earth was striking back, exacting breathlessness, asserting its demand to breathe. Thank you.
Unmute and clap. That was beautiful.
Thank you. And thanks again to POG for all you bring to our community.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was so beautiful. Thank you very much for your reading. And I want to say that I have the computer tonight on top of a piano, and I can hear a sort of shadow resonance as you speak. And so there's a sort of beautiful resonance happening in sound at the same time as it's happening in thought. So thank you very much, Cynthia. I am now going to pass it over to Charles. And Charles, you'll get to decide what to do next, but you will be you'll be introducing Cole Swensen, as well as perhaps reading some poems from Bev. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I think I'll introduce Cole and wait till she finishes, and then I'll say something about Bev, but maybe not my whole introduction. and we'll go from there. I think most of you here know Cole Swensen. She is the author of something like 16 or 17 books of poetry, and there's probably more since the last time I looked her bio up. And they include, beautiful books that are beautifully designed, some hand-produced volumes from very small presses, as well as works from the University of California Press, and an anthology she edited, American Hybrid, a Norton Anthology of New Poetry. And a book of her essays on poetry was published by the University of Michigan Press in 2011, Noise That Stays Noise. I know noise is something very dear to John Melillo's heart. So, and she is now on the faculty at Brown University in the Literary Arts program after having spent about a decade in the Iowa Writers Workshop, and before that as director of the creative writing program at the University of Denver. She is an activist in this poetry world I inhabit, far beyond what that says. She is both supportive of what many people I know are doing. Cynthia Hogue mentioned her support of the translation work Cynthia and Celine are doing, but she's also a part of the Tamas translation project in Paris that has supported many translators working on, I would say working not only on translating poetry, but developing relationships among people and nations through that act. Okay, and I have a sense when I'm in a Cole Swensen poem, as opposed to that division of being reader of it, but because I do feel like I'm in it, because I think she requests in the work in a way, or maybe makes it so that we have no choice but to hear it. You're really in a hearing space. I almost feel when I enter Cole Swensen's work, I feel like I'm maybe in a very fine chamber music performance, and the texture of the sound is light, or maybe light moves through the texture of sound. And yet it also includes the ground underneath, which is the ground of our being in all its complexity. I've felt that ever since early work of hers, as in the prose poems in Noon, to very recent work. But I wanted to read just a few lines from her book, Ours, which is, I think, is about 2000 and I can find that. 2008. And this is just a part of a poem called And the Birds Too. And it's Versailles, for instance, had any number of doors, which one will find when announced. There's a certain bow handed down that evokes swallow in a bosquet, owl all over town, even today, a cape afloat on a lake. And in the sounding of the vowels in that work, but I could have chosen almost any work from Cole, you are kind of in a musical performance, yet you're also finding out about a world that is evoked, that is both a real world and a world that is seen through the imagination too. And I think there's something about that ability to put us in a place which requires all our senses to filter the sound and the music, and yet also feel like we are in the world along with this author who is so committed to this world and to many of the issues in it that we are experiencing. So please welcome Cole Swensen.
Good, thank you very much for that lovely reading of those works. I really appreciate that, Charles. And thank you, Cynthia, for that gorgeous reading. It's going to be hard to follow. And thank you to all of POG for all the work that you do. I'm going to begin with an essay poem from a recent book that came out about 6 months ago. And it's a series of 20 quasi-essay, quasi-poems, kind of goes in and out, on landscape artists who seem to liberate the land through their landscape work, rather than having the tight frame and the appropriative traditions that often accompany much landscape art. So this is on, and we've got pretty pictures too. So I'm going to share the screen. And this is Gustav Klimt. Okay. Gustav Klimt, 17 Summers. Summer enters a series of photographs, so often on a dock, perhaps 1903, Gustav Klimt wearing his painter's smock, a monk on a lark with friends, including 2 men in a boat, oars in their hands, and the island of Litzelberg behind them. You can tell that they're friends, which is what makes it summer, which becomes the texture of reception. Now I've got to figure out how to advance this. Oh no. Okay, sorry, I fucked up. Okay, good. We're on roll again. You can tell that they're friends, which is what makes it summer, which becomes the texture of reception. A friend holds out a hand to a friend stepping off a boat. Children in the background, distracted by something that they're watching in the water. And now on the porch of a boathouse. 1904, Klimt and Emily Flöge, the only land in sight, far off behind them, hills to the left. In another photo, the large, soft nose of a horse takes up much of the upper right, and so the people beyond become calm, the lake laughing all over his face in the sun, the softer boat, under arc, under willow, or gliding up to the shore in the falling shadow, all pollen in shower. Lemon trees too, or the lemon alone, inherently summer in the palm of the hand. To simplify a complex life, quote, every morning just painting, he wrote, growing trees. Indeed, leaf by leaf and other friends, the Sommerfrische spent with an extended network of 3 families united by marriages and picnics, long walks and wild hats around a table at the edge of a lake. Klimt and Flüge in a rowboat, photo undated, Klimt, an oar left in his hand, and Emily standing, the other oar beside her, smiling, lined with shore. Flüge with her sweeping open overture, fiercely of summer, a sun of opinions, graciously but firmly, a boat in the anchor of her hands. Emily Flüge, an exceptionally independent woman and a leader in the dress reform movement, which connected unrestricted clothing to the political emancipation of women, was the younger sister of Klimt's brother's widow and was Klimt's constant companion for the last 27 years of his life. Klimt collaborated with her on numerous dress designs, such as the voluminous robes they're both wearing. Flüge standing, facing us, smiling, and Klimt rowing in a photo with a crisp sailboat slicing brightly into the forest in the background, stretching to the horizon. There's no indication that Klimt used any of these photographs in his work, but they may have given him the occasion to rethink proportion and put it at the service of the vast. The park, 1909, the enormous fluidity of the trees. Oops. There we go. The enormous fluidity of the tree. He understood how truly large trees are. He spread it out with the flat of his hand, extended the shadows into the shadowed, just as reflection dissembles or sweeps the people, small and uncountable, the people being swept up into the trees. And Emily, she stands adjusting a sleeve. She too is under a tree, and because the photograph is in black and white, her hair blends into the leaves. 1898, with the Flüge family in St. Agatha, painting the weather, the family central to the Austrian avant-garde, fin de siècle, where it has just stopped raining in the orchard still under the sway of the Vienna secession. And as for the distance, he was already using various optical devices to achieve a detail that ruptured scale and unified the surface. And Galling the year after, known for its gardens, terraces, and waterfall, the paintings, morning by the pond, an orchard in the evening, watching the hours cross the glass reflection of the sun, splitting open a tree. That summer, he adopted the format of the square and used it for all of his landscapes from then on. In this way, he too dissolved the distinction between portrait and landscape, thus asserting a place as a living being, as breathing and moving, a body stretching in the morning down a long avenue of overarching elms circa 1915. The person at the very back of the photo, so small that the trees grow taller as the figure disappears. How many of his trees are larger than the sky? So many of his trees are why the frame was made a broken thing, by giving way. By the trees arise, the tree as pure height. Tall poplars, 1900. Young birches, 1900. It was a year in which we leaned back and looked up and found that there was a limit that the concept, but moreover the fact of a tree, let us slip past. And suddenly it's August again. So again, they pack up the clothes, the books, the paints, and the canvas. Klimt started his paintings on site. His days often beginning at 6 a.m., and often he would paint from a boat, a mist across the lake gliding sideways in a certain laterality that annihilates depth. At the time, his landscapes were referred to as atmospheric, and the word timeless was frequently employed, which seems odd, as they are, in fact, about nothing but time and its fleeting resistance, about the length of a flicker that can get light to move water. From 1900 to 1916, he spent every summer on the Attersee, at the Brewery Inn at Litzelberg until 1907, then at the Villa Oleander at Kramer until 1913, and then down on the South Shore, where they stayed in the house of their friend Forster. 46 of Klimt's 50 or so known landscapes were painted at this lake, his compositions cited from a long way off. And in fact, he made a viewfinder, which he called his seeker, by cutting a square window out of a piece of cardboard, leaving a wide margin at the bottom by which he held it up to the distance, moving it slowly up and down, left and right. He must have had one eye shut, which must have made him slightly squint, which must have made passers-by wonder if he'd gotten something in his eye. And later, looking across to the Schloss Kammer on the Attersee 1, 1908, the light on the water is the light of the house, the bright white of its facade, which must just at this moment be stricken by noon, which made someone turn around. And thus there's a face looking back over a shoulder, asking if everything we're seeing is not actually paint, or at least in part, a handprint on the sun. Alone, summer is. That said, very few of Klimt's landscapes that feature water include reflections, exceptions, the Litzelberg Keller on the Attersee, 1912 to 16, and 1916, Schönberg Park. Perhaps it was simply that he rarely looked back. Perhaps, too, a view is always a driving force and one that's always headed forward, past the photographic evidence suspended on its small peninsula. Most of them painted through opera glasses or a telescope, the lens collapsing depth and making the view refuse to extend. Instead, it climbs. There goes the sky, colonizing the sky, layered or erasing leaf by leaf, so that in most of his works, there's no sky at all, or only a very thin strip way up at the top. So the light then must come from the painting itself, and so the world is lit by hand. If a slightly darker green beneath enters the weather, the drizzle all summer, all slight St. Agatha in the final years of meadows, up against a lake surrounded by centuries of light mist and a lighter, almost celadon rising. Some summers come with more weather than others. 1913, the broken green is a singing thing, a singing that we heard and turned, and there it was, Klimt in splinters, slicing off light with a very small knife, slivers wherever a verdure is engendered, and Klimt face down in the green of it. He was a man who never got used to the telephone. Though he had telephone in Vienna in 1912. He preferred to write postcards, sometimes letters, more and more. The postcards he also used to turn into sketches and then into full paintings. And he often wrote not on the back, but over and around the image, filling up the sky. And when I passed through this room, making me yearn amid rain. His last summer at the Attersee was 1916. He scattered enormous trees all over in tiny pieces that landed in pieces that made them into places, and then walked out without thinking. Later, Klimt at the oars and the boat with its own brittle idea of order, racing a leaf down a mirror. He worked slowly, meticulously, rising before anyone else into the empty house, into the summer that far north, in which the question of mourning is increasingly simply a tone on a palette, a gravel path from which you could see the foothills of the Alps, a gravel path up which no one is walking. There are never any people in Klimt's landscapes, no animals, and so we must concede that it must be the landscape itself that is moving. I'm going to end with a few short pieces from someone asked me to do a critical book, a book on poetics. And so this is some pieces from that. The book is called, what is it called? I've been going back and forth on titles. I'll tell you that later. Okay, Connote. I wonder if you can use words in such a way that it's only their connotations and not their denotations that get activated. To connotate, as one might cogitate or contemplate, a state chosen for its particular relation to thought, so that it's not the definition, always restrictive, of the word that comes into play, but its fields of association, its overtones and undertones, always expansive, radiating zones of suggestion and implication, in the middle of which gapes the strangely blinding blind spot of the impossibility of precise literal meaning, suggesting in turn that language at heart is always an absence. But then I thought that that's a practice that might lead to a greatly restricted vocabulary, as some words just have richer connotative fields than others, while some have none at all. And as I thought that, I started looking around. I was on a crowded street with an open market on one side and a school and a park on the other. And I found myself searching unsuccessfully for a single word in the entire scene, be it noun, verb, or modifier, whose connotative possibilities didn't hugely exceed its denotative ones. Somewhat related, perhaps each phoneme sends out waves that radiate spherically, each with its unique inherent qualities, which include color, so that any word is composed of many of these, and they overlap like spherical Venn diagrams, all transparent so that they color each other, making every word a visual chord and every sentence a kaleidoscopic aerial orchestra. Some species of early hominids had the optical ability to perceive them, but since they overwhelmed the visual field, blotting out tigers, cliffs, and other such details in the landscape, that branch of our ancestry disappeared in exact relation to the development of language. The uncountable. Is there such a thing as a non-quantifiable line, a line that can't be scanned because what is not said in it constitutes such a large part of the content, a line in which the not said, but nonetheless sensed, like a musical overtone, fully participates in the rhythm. And yet, as it doesn't actually exist, it can't actually be counted. The result is that these overtones continue out of reach of the leash of quantification, which keeps the line from ever ending. Who was it who said, it's not the notes you hit, but the ones that you don't? Miles Davis. A related statement, paraphrased from a Kaja Silverman lecture, quote, there is in every painting and every photograph something that cannot be seen. And similarly, there is in everything thinkable, at least a twinge of the unthinkable. The unthinkable, a twinge of the unthinkable. The thinkable is there to mask it, is there to protect it, for both the invisible and the unthinkable are incredibly vulnerable. Raw, they haven't yet developed shells, not even edges. Keep on thinking, knowing that you're saving something very fragile from the damage of daylight. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That was beautiful. And, connotation is connection, only it's almost like connection of the edges and auras of things. That was absolutely wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our next reader who's not here because she is, had a malady of the tongue and cannot speak right now. And I don't know if most of you knew that. I didn't actually know it until tonight. I knew something had happened, but not the extent of it. So that is Beverly Dahlen, of course, that I'm talking about. And I'm going to say something about her, and then I'm going to read something by her and ask if anyone else here would like to read something they may have by her. I know one other person in the audience because she's in my house and I took her the books, has some of her books too, but that may have been a burden to hand somebody 4 books and say, pick something to read. So anyway, Beverly Dahlen is best known for her ongoing work, A Reading, begun in 1978, published in several volumes, including A Reading 1 through 7, A Reading 8 through 10, A Reading 11 through 17, A Reading 18 through 20, A Reading Spicer, and 18 Sonnets. She is also the author of Out of the Third and several chapbooks, including A Letter at Easter to George Stanley, the Egyptian poems. She was raised in Portland, but has been a resident of San Francisco since the 1950s. She is a recipient of a grant from the Foundation for Contemporary Arts and Lifetime Achievement Award from Small Press Traffic. She was a founding editor of the feminist journal However, which is now the online journal How To. And I think others here have had quite a bit to do with that project as well, including Cynthia Hogue, who read tonight, and probably you too, Kolb, I'm not sure. But going back to what I said earlier about Cole's work, with Bev Dahlen, I could probably find a metaphor in music, though it would have to be both as dense and intriguing as Bach and as unpredictable and committed to sound, to the world, to the entire notion of exploration as Mingus or Monk. It could be danced to, but each step would be each reader's individual mindful step. It is something else I sense with her work, more of a weaving, not unrelated to Circes or Penelopes and other great weavers of history and legend. The very beginning of A Reading, she writes, before that and before that, everything in a line. So at the very beginning, we're going one way. We are in the warp, and the weft will come, moving to her shapes and to her readings. Yet in her weaving, not every line or phrase connects to the next or the previous. That is, there is room for liftings, leavings, loosenings. She contains much of the uncanny, or as HD thought of such moves, jellyfish moments. And of course, all of this is work in language, so that it's in the lines of weaving too, the language is. Here from the very end of the first published book of A Reading, then made over a package wrapped, signifier to signifier, the signified buried in the backyard, a bottle of white rum, he dug it up, and on top of that, this happened. The past, present, and future happened. Language happened. We happened in time. At almost the end of the sonnets, in A Reading Spicer and 18 Sonnets, she writes, we can't help the age we are. He played for time, and so in a way did I. With playing in time, we are back to music. And in this composer's hands, we are aware of the errant and inerrant weaving of things. That is, we are aware of ourselves in the world. Okay, so that's that. And so I'll read this first piece that I wanted to read, and then I'm going to ask if anybody else wants to read anything. And if you don't, that's fine too. We can have an early evening, whatever happens. I'm going to read from part 5 of A Reading, which is in the first published book of this wonderful book that was brought out by Stephen Vincent and was published in 1985. Partly nightmare, weakness, succumbing, we walked down the steps. I said, I don't want to do this. Walking in at hell mouth. Why? To separate myself, to be underground gone. To be gone for a while, tasting that again. And he who was a figure of the god Dionysus, hidden in the side of his father. On me again, the drunkenness. I went through it, bent my head to it, yielding the gift of bearing, he wrote. My hands in that effort to hold on to it, not moving. I went through it. It took me, carried away by it, taken, overtaken. I had come to this place. It was made for me. I fitted into it. I knew what place it was. It was hell, and I walked down the steps, bearing. He who was also torn apart, the women in the wilderness tearing, outside the law, they would have it, devour that mouth. And the wine which was on me, the gift of bearing, he who had borne it not to be stopped. I had not known his name, I had not known it. He who was hidden in the side of his father. And then we were already walking down the steps. I did not want to go on that rescue mission, a mother to be rescued, there in the arms of death, a mother seeking sought in the underworld, going down there. I was looking for a God. I already knew it. How, getting off the bus on Valencia Street some night and walking into the arms of an old friend, do you expect to see it? Sitting in some funky taco place, Eros all over me, silly. I wouldn't see it. His wild beard and hair, some secret mission, some place in the mountains to get to, some way going. How should I know? Speaking in tongues, I gave him all the time he needed to get out of my life. Get out. It had come to this. And then he picked up the harp and blew. Blues. How I would not mother him, sister him, be any other or none, nothing to do with it, forsaking it, what I had given up forever. How soon would it bring me, lead me down those steps, he where I would see him. In those stories, they never recognize the God, and then it's too late. That's just the first section of that big section of a reading. Thank you. I know, Cynthia Miller, did you want to read something? I think you can unmute. Yeah.
I found a couple things in a reading 18 to 20. It's such a lovely bunch of writing. And Anne Waldman, who actually is our next presenter next month, has written the blurb on the back, and she just raves about it and how important it is for survival and summons everyone. And I think that's so, that's so Annie. But anyway, talking about how Beverly's always talking about, we seem to have this need for order and we want things to be a certain way and they aren't. And in the meantime, we're getting completely undermined by the way we live and the choices we make. And anyway, so she's talking about the ignorant yet dangerous status quo. Okay, so then she quotes a couple lines from in this book. I couldn't find the whole poem, I apologize. Quote, "It would be difficult to name the timeless values when gas pumps had become sacred objects, worshiping at a bowl of gelato. How do you do?" That's one of them. This book actually has a lot of funny in it, which is not always true, but Bev's actually pretty funny. Here we go. Burning up the distance, listening into Santa Fe. You could be anywhere, south, north. Can we speak of the local, a day in anybody's time zone, nights tipping toward the solstice, hemispheres of execution, remote events written in the fossil record, written in the stars, remote execution of events, speechless for the luxury of life on one continent. Anyway. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other volunteers out there that have Bev Dahlen at hand? Okay, if there's not.
Tenney does.
Oh, okay, Tenney does. That's great.
Yeah, can people hear me okay? Or
Yes.
I found something I don't know where it's from. Asymptote, and it must be in a book someplace, but there are two poems, and here's a little prose poem. It's from an issue from January 2008 called Scapegoat. The story carries the burden as if it were a scapegoat driven into the desert and turns again in its wandering, returning. The sentence is erased, but if it were true, it would return again as another and find its way unknown through the town. It hinders one. Its disguise betrays one. Its face stares from the window of a passing car weeping. If the story were true, another reads the burden as if it were a mirror and turns again, returning to an unnamed town. Finding one's way in the dark, the story deceives one. It leads one in this way to a truth which had seemed to be unspeakable. The truth of the story is hidden and densely wrapped as if it were buried in a rocky tomb. It bears the burden of death and is beaten and driven into the desert and rises and returns again. It is that passing face which changes everything.
That's great. I was thinking about what Cynthia said about how Bev could be funny. And sometimes that fun would be in like a overflowing explosiveness of language. And the beginning of a reading Spicer, she does that. And so I'm just going to read this first page of it, which isn't long, but a warning is soothing, a part of the landscape of sound in the inner ear. This book nests in your pocket hand, vests interest in the larger structure, the complex merger, global markets, the recent flood receding all over town, glint, glint, whoo, whoo, the mocking dove in the rafters, gurgling in excelsis, glorioski zero, my dog gone, densely in the spasms and lapses, my dog gone. I just love that. Okay. And then I'm going to end this, I guess, with the last of her 18 sonnets, because it's very different. I mean, it's still Bev, but it's different in a way. These are sonnets which kind of have 14 lines, but they're sort of in prose and they're exactly justified. So wherever the word breaks and continues in the next part, it's an interesting structure. Anyway, in America, we have no ideology. A famous journalist avers the country is run entirely on common sense and gasoline. The people is plural and energetic, especially the new ones displaced from their homes in Asia. The schools are terrible. The politicians trivialize serious issues, and so do the media, but everything's genetic. And in 20 years, we'll find the two great 19th century reputations most tarnished will be those of Marx and Freud. There is no deeply hidden and intricate motive for unhappiness. Happiness must be our lot in life. If some can achieve it, then all must do so. Research on the brain indicates we are very close to this universal human goal. We will be happy anyway. Thanks, Bev. Wish her the best, and I'm so happy all of you came. I guess I should turn it back to John to close the evening.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's what a great way to end the reading too, with the multiple voices. And it made me think that I said at the beginning of this, our first regular reading, because of course we always begin the POG season with a kind of POG and Friends quilt reading where we have lots of different readers. And this sort of had the effect of making this like a POG and Friends as well as a quote unquote regular reading, as if there ever is such a thing. Really, really appreciate everything that I heard tonight and saw. Really happy to see everyone here. Thank you all. Want to remind you that we have our next event on November 13th with Ann Waldman, as Cynthia said. I will also have the honor of opening that night, doing some sounding and noising and whatnot. Really excited to see what comes next in POG, and glad that you're all here, and I hope you all join us next month. I believe that's the end this evening. One other thing is, if you haven't had the chance to donate yet, or if you want to, please consider going to our website, not only registering for all the events for this season, but also donating when you have the chance. Thank you all for being here. Good night, and thanks again.